What if I told you that Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, once gathered up his favorite books, books he cherished, underlined, and read countless times, only to coat them in oil and set them on fire? And no, this wasn't some casual whim or fleeting impulse. This was a calculated act, part of something far more mysterious, an event steeped in symbolism and raw emotion. Behind this strange ritual lay a deeper story that few know, a story revealing a side of Elvis that went beyond the spotlight and his famous swagger. This act was no accident. It speaks of hidden beliefs, inner conflicts, and maybe even a desperate attempt at some kind of release or rebirth. What was he struggling with so deeply that it drove him to burn the very pages that had once guided him? Stick around as we unravel the layers of this haunting mystery and explore the hidden world of Elvis Presley's inner battles. Number 7. Setting the stage. In this video, we're diving into one of the most unusual and least known rituals Elvis Presley ever performed, one that involved his very own collection of beloved books. Far from being a simple act, this ritual is a window into a part of Elvis's life that the world rarely glimpsed. The image of Elvis as the rebellious, charismatic king of rock and roll only scratches the surface. Beneath the fame, he was a man with profound curiosity, driven by a relentless need to understand life's deeper mysteries. This rare and private ritual tells us that there was more to Elvis than the world saw, a complexity and depth that often went unnoticed amidst the blinding lights of fame. Today, we're peeling back that curtain to explore a side of Elvis that has mostly been left in the shadows. Elvis was more than a musical icon. He was a seeker. At the height of his fame, he was also on a personal journey to find meaning, often through books that explored spirituality, mysticism, and self-discovery. He wasn't just an avid reader, but a deeply thoughtful one, filling his books with notes and markings, almost as if he were having conversations with the authors on the pages. From meditation practices to ancient philosophies, from religious doctrines to occult texts, Elvis's reading list was surprisingly eclectic. His curiosity for what lay beyond the tangible, beyond fame, and beyond the rock and roll lifestyle was undeniable. Yet, this same fascination with the unknown was something he kept mostly hidden from his fans and the public eye, revealing it only through rare, cryptic moments like this one. What drove a global superstar like Elvis to embrace such unconventional ideas? How did this quest for spiritual and mystical answers shape his choices and beliefs? And perhaps, the biggest question of all, what inner turmoil led him to enact a ritual involving some of his most prized possessions, his books? It's almost as if Elvis's yearning to understand the mysteries of life was at constant odds with his turbulent reality. This particular ritual gives us clues about his struggles, his hopes, and his desperate need for meaning amidst the chaos of stardom. As we uncover the layers of this ritual, we'll see just how far Elvis was willing to go in his search for clarity, peace, and perhaps something even deeper. Stick with us as we venture into the unexplored depths of Elvis's private world. Number 6. Background on Elvis's spiritual journey. Elvis Presley wasn't just the king of rock and roll. He was a man relentlessly searching for answers to questions that many of us ask, but few pursue with the same intensity. Beneath the flashy suits and commanding stage presence, Elvis was drawn to spirituality, constantly exploring the deeper meanings of life, fame, and his own purpose. He craved knowledge beyond what his fame and talent could provide, seeking out books and mentors who could guide him through this internal quest. Whether it was in the quiet hours after a show or in moments stolen away from the public eye, Elvis would immerse himself in these teachings, hoping to find the answers he needed. It wasn't just idle curiosity. It was almost as if he felt compelled to understand the mysteries of existence and his place within them. His personal library was a testament to his thirst for spiritual knowledge. Elvis's shelves were lined with an eclectic mix of titles, from the well-worn pages of the Bible to volumes on self-help, mysticism, and esoteric practices. For him, these books were more than mere objects. They were stepping stones on a journey toward enlightenment. He studied everything he could get his hands on, filling the margins with notes and marking passages that resonated with him. Books on meditation, reincarnation, numerology, and even occult philosophies all found a place in his collection. Elvis's interests weren't limited by traditional beliefs or mainstream practices. He sought out the unusual and unconventional, unafraid to explore paths that others might shy away from. Through these texts, he pieced together a worldview that was both deeply personal and entirely unique, reflecting a blend of Western religion, Eastern philosophy, and mystical traditions. But Elvis's spiritual journey wasn't a straight line. It was an ever-evolving quest, shaped by the highs and lows of his life. His fascination with the unknown only seemed to grow over time, as he delved deeper into subjects that others might find strange or even taboo. He dabbled in Eastern philosophies, studied paranormal phenomena, and became intrigued by the occult, seeing each new discovery as a way to unlock hidden parts of himself. To many, it might seem surprising that a man of his stature would be drawn to such unconventional teachings. But for Elvis, the search was ongoing, an exploration that moved with him, growing more intense as he struggled with the isolation and pressures of fame. And yet, despite this personal quest, few people outside his closest circle ever saw this side of him. It was only in moments like the ritual we're about to explore that glimpses of his inner world would surface, leaving behind more questions than answers about who Elvis Presley really was beneath the legend. Number 5. Elvis's connection to his books. For Elvis Presley, books were more than just objects collecting dust on a shelf. They were confidants, companions on a deeply personal spiritual journey, and sources of solace during times of uncertainty. In a world where few could understand the weight of his fame or the depth of his inner struggles, these books became his escape. Each one held a piece of the wisdom or guidance he sought, offering insights into questions he couldn't easily answer on his own. To Elvis, they were like old friends, always available when he needed them most, ready to lend comfort, perspective, or even a challenge to his beliefs. Through their pages, he could explore worlds far removed from the pressures of celebrity, diving into ideas that would either soothe his soul or ignite a new fire within him. These books became as much a part of his life as the music that defined his career. Elvis's relationship with his books went far beyond passive reading. He would pore over the pages, his pen in hand, underlining passages that resonated with him and scrawling notes in the margins, as if in conversation with the author. His annotations reveal a man deeply engaged, grappling with the concepts and insights that spoke to him. The margins of his books were filled with thoughts, reflections, and questions, a testament to the fact that he wasn't just absorbing information. He was wrestling with it, actively seeking to incorporate it into his own worldview. In these pages, we glimpse a side of Elvis that few were ever privy to, a man in constant dialogue with himself and his beliefs, seeking answers not just for his own life, but for something larger, something spiritual. The written words became a mirror reflecting his innermost thoughts, illuminating the complexities of a man who, despite his fame, was searching for something beyond the material world. But even as these books offered him solace and guidance, they also brought with them a shadow of inner conflict. Some of the ideas he encountered challenged him, causing him to question his own identity and purpose. At times, he may have found himself wrestling with concepts that conflicted with his personal beliefs, making him feel as if he were at odds with himself. These books held both light and darkness for him, serving as guides but also as reminders of the struggles he faced internally. It was this very conflict that eventually pushed him toward a dramatic decision, a decision that would take this spiritual connection with his books to an unexpected place. For Elvis, these volumes were more than paper and ink. They had power, an influence so potent that he felt compelled to act in a way few could have anticipated. And it's this act, this intense ritual, that reveals a glimpse of the real Elvis Presley, a man torn between worlds and searching for peace in the most unusual of ways. Number 4. The tension builds, frustrations, and inner conflict. As the world watched Elvis Presley rise to extraordinary fame, few could see the emotional toll it took on him. Behind the glitz and glamour of stardom, Elvis faced a battle against isolation, loneliness, and the unrelenting pressure of living up to his legendary image. Everywhere he went, he was met with crowds, adoration, and a seemingly endless demand for more of the king of rock and roll. Yet, despite the love from millions of fans, he struggled to find a sense of belonging. The constant scrutiny, the weight of expectation, and the realization that he could never truly be anonymous created an isolation that fame only deepened. To the outside world, he was an icon, a larger-than-life figure who seemed to have it all. But to Elvis, there were moments when his fame felt like a prison, and his heart longed for something beyond the superficial trappings of celebrity life. These pressures chipped away at his peace of mind, and it was here that his spiritual journey took on a darker, more complex edge. While Elvis turned to spirituality in search of comfort and understanding, his exploration didn't always bring the solace he sought. The deeper he went into the realms of mysticism and self-discovery, the more he unearthed truths that sometimes left him conflicted and unsettled. Elvis's spiritual beliefs became a double-edged sword. On one hand, they offered glimpses of peace and connection to something greater than himself. On the other, they sometimes clashed with the very fabric of who he was, causing an internal tension that only grew with time. He found himself pulled between the demands of fame and a yearning to understand his place in the world on a deeper, more spiritual level, a yearning that at times led to more questions than answers. This inner conflict left him searching, trying to reconcile the man he wanted to be with the image everyone else expected. And then, something in his personal library, those books he had treasured and studied for years, triggered a profound response. It was as if, within the pages of these texts, he found words or ideas that struck a raw nerve, reaching deep into his heart and unsettling his very core. What had once been sources of wisdom and guidance now began to stir a different kind of emotion within him. Whether it was a passage he read, a concept he struggled to accept, or a belief he could no longer reconcile, something within these books led him to a shocking and intense decision. The very books that had guided him on his spiritual path were now the focus of a ritual so dramatic, so unlike anything he had done before, that it left those close to him in disbelief. This act wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a powerful release of the emotions, conflicts, and burdens he had carried alone for so long. What drove him to this ritual? And what could it possibly mean about the inner life of Elvis Presley? As we draw closer to uncovering the full story, we'll see how one man's quest for peace led to a moment that few could have anticipated. Number 3. The bizarre ritual, burning the books. One night, in a moment that would shock anyone who knew him, Elvis Presley did something few would expect from a man so deeply connected to his cherished books. He carefully selected a handful of these volumes, books he had read, loved, and even relied on in his most private moments, and began preparing them for a shocking act. He didn't just throw them into a fire on a whim. He meticulously coated each book with oil, as if in preparation for a symbolic ritual. Then, in a quiet, secluded space, he set them alight, watching as the flames devoured the pages that had once held so much meaning for him. This was not a hasty decision made in a moment of anger or frustration. It was something far more intentional, a deliberate action that seemed to carry a weight of significance and finality. That night, as the fire crackled, Elvis watched his chosen books burn, letting the flames consume them, and with them, something buried deep within himself. For Elvis, This act went beyond simple destruction. It was a form of ritual cleansing, a powerful release of emotions and energies that had built up over years. These books had been his guides, his spiritual mentors, but somewhere along the way, they had also become symbols of inner conflict and unrest. Each book he chose to burn had, in some way, contributed to the weight he was carrying. By burning them, he wasn't rejecting the wisdom they held, but rather the turmoil they now represented. This ritual was Elvis's way of purging that negative energy, freeing himself from the internal battles that had been fueled by the words and ideas on those pages. It was a farewell to the confusion and conflict that had haunted him, a final act of letting go. Watching the fire consume those pages felt, perhaps, like shedding an old skin, a painful yet necessary act to move forward. The burning of his books held deep, symbolic meaning, as if Elvis was releasing not just physical objects, but pieces of his own identity he no longer wished to carry. Each book that went up in flames represented beliefs, ideals, or expectations that had once shaped him but had become burdensome in his search for peace. In that moment, he was saying goodbye to parts of himself he felt no longer served him, parts that perhaps had been in conflict with the person he yearned to be. This act was both a release and a rebirth, a way of clearing a path forward by eliminating the things that had kept him tethered to his past struggles. It was an emotional, powerful gesture, one filled with the raw intensity of a man desperate to find clarity and relief. For Elvis, this ritual marked the end of a chapter, a symbolic purging of his past, as he sought a future free from the weight of expectations and internal conflicts. Number 2. The possible motivations behind the ritual. The reasons behind Elvis's powerful and unsettling ritual are open to interpretation, but they offer a fascinating window into the inner life of a man who often seemed larger than life. Perhaps in burning these books, Elvis was trying to cleanse himself of certain influences that he felt had steered him off his desired path. Over the years, as he dove deeper into these spiritual and mystical texts, some ideas may have no longer resonated or may even have become burdens. This ritual could have been his way of breaking free from those beliefs, allowing himself to clear out the spiritual clutter and make room for new insights. Or maybe, after years of absorbing others' perspectives, he wanted to return to his own sense of self, untainted by external dogmas. This act may have been his attempt to reclaim his individuality by letting go of the mentors and teachings that had once guided him but no longer felt like his own. This intense ritual also speaks volumes about Elvis's ongoing struggle to reconcile the dichotomy between his public and private lives, between his fame and his deeper spiritual needs. Elvis had spent years performing for the world, playing the role of a superstar, while privately yearning for something more meaningful than the adulation of fans or the accolades of success. For a man as famous as he was, this duality created a constant tension. He was adored for his public persona, but few truly knew the man behind it, someone who sought inner peace and understanding in a way that was rarely acknowledged. In burning these books, Elvis might have been attempting to free himself from the version of himself the world saw, stripping away influences that represented expectations rather than his true self. This ritual could have been a step toward reconciling his inner life with the image he projected, a step toward finding a place where he could be at peace with both. The question then arises, was this ritual a transformative act of spiritual liberation? Or was it a desperate attempt to escape a frustration that he could no longer bear? The scene of Elvis alone, watching flames consume his cherished books, evokes a sense of both release and sorrow. Was he truly freeing himself, finally letting go of beliefs that had become a burden? Or was this a moment of helplessness, a final gesture made out of emotional exhaustion? As viewers, we are left to wonder whether this act was an empowering decision to start anew or a last resort, a dramatic purge born of a mind and heart that could no longer reconcile the weight of his struggles. In either case, This ritual paints a poignant portrait of a man yearning for meaning, a man who sought answers even in his most private, haunting moments. Number 1. Legacy and reflection. This strange ritual, the night Elvis Presley set fire to his most cherished books, adds a profound layer of complexity to the legacy of a man often seen as the embodiment of rock and roll. For so many, Elvis is remembered as the charismatic showman, the swiveling hips, the smooth voice, and the electrifying presence that could fill any room. But this ritual pulls back the curtain on a different side of the king, a side that battled inner demons, that was plagued by questions, and that was willing to take extreme, almost shocking actions to confront his own struggles. This image of Elvis, not as the dazzling star, but as a deeply conflicted soul searching for meaning, reminds us that fame doesn't shield anyone from personal battles. If anything, his fame intensified his isolation, making his internal conflicts even harder to bear. This ritual reveals a man of depth and vulnerability, an artist who was not afraid to confront himself in ways the world may never fully understand. Even now, decades after his passing, Elvis Presley continues to mystify and intrigue us. His music and films are timeless, yet it's these lesser-known, private moments that captivate our curiosity and pull us deeper into the enigma of his character. The ritual of burning his books is a testament to an inner life far more complex than the one we see on the surface. It's a reminder that Elvis was more than a rock and roll icon. He was a human being who felt the full spectrum of emotions, who struggled with his identity, and who sought answers in the shadows of fame. This act of setting his beloved books ablaze reveals a glimpse of his journey to find clarity, perhaps even peace. It's a haunting image that stays with us, adding a layer of poignancy to the legacy of a man we thought we knew. This act has become part of his story, a mystery that invites us to reconsider Elvis as not just a performer, but as a person who wrestled with the same doubts and questions that many of us do. So, what do you think this ritual reveals about Elvis's character? Was it a moment of liberation, a sign of his quest for self-discovery? Or was it an act of frustration, a symbol of his inner turmoil and struggle to find balance? Comment below and share your thoughts, because even now the king of rock and roll leaves us with more questions than answers, and his story is one we continue to piece together, one mystery at a time. We'd love to hear what you think about this extraordinary moment in Elvis's life. Was this ritual a bold act of liberation, or do you think it reflected the weight of his inner struggles? Share your thoughts, interpretations, and opinions in the comments below. Your insights are what keep Elvis's legacy alive and continue to unveil the layers of his incredible story. Let's dive into this mystery together. Leave your comments and let's discuss. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, may have dazzled millions, but behind the scenes, his life was far more turbulent. One night, his fiancée, Ginger Alden, saw a side of him that shocked her to the core. In a moment of rage, Elvis lost his temper in an unexpected way. But what could have triggered such a shocking outburst? Their relationship, which began in 1976, seemed glamorous on the outside, but Elvis struggled privately with body image, health issues, and mood swings fueled by prescription drugs. One night, everything boiled over, leaving Ginger stunned. What led to this moment? Stay tuned as we unravel the unbelievable story behind this wild moment in Elvis Presley's history. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more incredible stories about the king of rock and roll. Number 6. Elvis's struggles with body image and health. Elvis Presley was not only an icon for his music, but also for his striking looks and physical presence. However, as the years went on, the pressure to maintain his youthful appearance began to weigh heavily on him. Elvis became increasingly obsessed with his physical appearance, especially his waistline, which he believed was growing out of control. This fixation on his body image led him to scrutinize every detail, often staring at himself in the mirror with frustration. He would complain about his weight constantly, unable to shake the feeling that he was losing his once trim figure. For someone constantly in the public eye, this struggle became a source of great insecurity. Ginger Alden, who had a front-row seat to Elvis's personal battles, tried to help in her own way. Sometimes she would gently comment on his eating habits, suggesting that his late-night indulgences weren't helping his waistline. But these well-meaning remarks often sparked tension between them. Elvis, already sensitive about his appearance, didn't take kindly to her observations. The tension over his eating habits would build over time, creating a delicate balance that could be disrupted at any moment. Ginger's attempts to support Elvis only seemed to ignite a deeper frustration within him, pushing him to his breaking point. To make matters worse, Elvis's health was deteriorating rapidly during this period. His late-night lifestyle, where he would stay up until the early hours watching movies and eating, was compounded by a heavy reliance on prescription medications. These drugs were meant to help him sleep, but they often worsened his mood swings and clouded his judgment. Elvis's unpredictable moods, fueled by his declining health and body image struggles, became more frequent. He would shift from calm to furious in a matter of moments, leaving those around him walking on eggshells. It was a perfect storm. His weight struggles, Ginger's well-intentioned comments, and his health problems all converging, setting the stage for an explosive moment. But what finally pushed him over the edge? You'll have to watch to find out. Number 5. The incident setup. During one of their trips to Hawaii, a place Elvis loved for its beauty and seclusion, an incident occurred that left a lasting impact on Ginger. What was supposed to be a relaxing holiday in paradise turned into a moment she would never forget. While they were enjoying the sun and the surf, a simple conversation between them took a sudden, dark turn. Elvis, already on edge from the pressures of his health and body image issues, became frustrated with Ginger's comments about his diet. She had noticed him drinking an excessive amount of papaya juice, something she thought was harmless to point out. But to Elvis, this felt like another criticism of his weight. His reaction was swift and shocking. He slapped her in a burst of frustration, completely out of character for the man she thought she knew. The atmosphere turned tense, and the holiday suddenly didn't feel like a getaway anymore. That moment in Hawaii was not isolated. It was part of a growing pattern of tension that had been building between them for months. While Elvis could be loving and attentive, his insecurities and mood swings were becoming more frequent, especially when it came to conversations about his appearance or health. Ginger, always walking a fine line, had learned to be cautious about what she said, knowing that even a small comment could spark his temper. But as time went on, it became harder to avoid the inevitable confrontations. The stress of their relationship, combined with Elvis's physical decline, was creating a ticking time bomb. This holiday, which was meant to be a break from the pressures of fame and the public eye, only highlighted the cracks in their relationship. Tensions didn't just simmer, they began to boil over. What started as a small, innocent remark about his habits could easily escalate into a full-blown argument, with Elvis's temper flaring in ways Ginger never expected. The Hawaiian holiday was just one example of how fragile their relationship had become under the weight of Elvis's personal struggles. Every disagreement, every comment seemed to bring them closer to an inevitable explosion. Elvis's frustrations were growing, and it was only a matter of time before they would manifest again. But what would happen the next time? How much longer could Ginger endure the tension? These questions loomed as the pressure continued to mount, setting the stage for the shocking night that would later come. Number 4. The infamous food-throwing incident. One night at Graceland, the air in Elvis's iconic home was thick with tension. The once lively and warm atmosphere had been replaced with a feeling of unease as Elvis grappled with the growing pressures in his life, his health, his image, and the relentless scrutiny that came with being an international superstar. As usual, Elvis and Ginger were spending the evening together, but something was different. Elvis was visibly on edge, sitting at the table with a large bowl of ice cream in front of him. He had been indulging more frequently, using food as a comfort in the face of his struggles. Concerned for his well-being, Ginger gently suggested that maybe he should start cutting back on his late-night overeating. She didn't think much of her comment. It was meant with care, as she often tried to help Elvis manage his health. But this time, her words struck a nerve. In an instant, Elvis's face twisted with anger. The frustration that had been brewing inside him erupted in a way Ginger had never seen before. Without warning, he grabbed the bowl of ice cream and hurled it against the wall, the sound of the bowl shattering echoing through the room. Ice cream splattered across the wall, a stark visual of the emotions that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long. Ginger, stunned, froze in her seat as Elvis shot her a glare so intense that it sent a chill down her spine. His eyes were filled with a mix of rage, hurt, and something else, something deeper. It was as if all of his internal struggles, the weight of his insecurities, had come pouring out in that single, shocking moment. Elvis, the man who could command the stage with ease, now seemed so vulnerable and overwhelmed. The emotional intensity of that night lingered long after the ice cream had been wiped away. It wasn't just the act of throwing the bowl that shocked Ginger, it was what it represented. In that moment, Elvis wasn't just lashing out at her, he was fighting a battle within himself. His body image issues, his declining health, and the unrelenting pressure to maintain the king of rock and roll persona had all taken their toll. This wasn't just a one-time outburst. It was a window into the deeper turmoil Elvis was enduring. For Ginger, this moment marked a turning point, one that highlighted the fragility of their relationship and the heavy burden Elvis carried every day. As the pieces of broken glass were cleaned up, the emotional scars of that night remained, leaving both of them to wonder what would come next in their tumultuous journey together. Number 3. The aftermath of the incident. Elvis Presley's mood swings became more frequent and intense in his final years, and much of this volatility could be traced back to his growing reliance on prescription drugs. As the pressures of his career and personal life mounted, Elvis found it increasingly difficult to cope. One of his biggest struggles was with insomnia. His mind would race late into the night, preventing him from getting the rest he so desperately needed. To combat this, he turned to a dangerous cocktail of prescription medications, which helped him sleep, but came with severe side effects. These drugs often left him groggy and irritable, leading to unpredictable mood swings that those closest to him, like his fiancée Ginger Alden, had to endure. His reliance on these substances created a vicious cycle, where his frustration and exhaustion only fed his need for more medication, further exacerbating his emotional instability. Ginger, who loved Elvis deeply, found herself witnessing the darker side of his struggles more often than anyone else. She was there during some of his most vulnerable moments, bearing witness to his outbursts when the weight of his inner battles became too much. These aggressive episodes, while terrifying in the moment, were always followed by profound regret. Elvis would quickly realize the impact of his words or actions and would rush to make things right. He was not an inherently violent or angry man. Frustrations were often a byproduct of his deteriorating physical and emotional state, amplified by the drugs he was taking. After each outburst, Elvis would apologize to Ginger, his remorse sincere as he tried to explain his behavior. He wanted to be the loving partner she deserved, but the toll of his lifestyle made it difficult for him to consistently control his emotions. Despite these moments of anger and frustration, Elvis always sought to make amends. He would try to reassure Ginger, often following his apologies with grand gestures of love and affection. He didn't want her to see him as the broken man he sometimes felt like inside. Elvis was, at his core, a man who cared deeply for those he loved, and even in his most troubled moments, he never stopped trying to show it. His attempts to repair the damage caused by his outbursts were proof of his desire to hold on to the people who mattered most to him, even as he struggled to hold on to himself. These moments of reconciliation after each aggressive episode were bittersweet for Ginger. They showed her the man Elvis truly was beneath the pain, even if those glimpses became fewer as his struggles deepened. Number 2. The bigger picture. Elvis's struggles in his final days. Elvis Presley's unpredictable mood swings, like the one that led him to throw a bowl of ice cream in anger, were symptomatic of a much larger struggle he faced in his final years. As the pressures of fame weighed more heavily on him, so too did the physical and emotional toll of his declining health. Once a man of boundless energy, Elvis was now battling constant fatigue, compounded by a growing dependence on prescription medications to manage his pain, anxiety, and sleeplessness. These drugs, intended to help him cope, instead trapped him in a cycle of highs and lows, leaving him vulnerable to sudden outbursts and deep emotional swings. What Ginger witnessed that night was not an isolated incident, but rather a reflection of the growing storm inside Elvis, one that he struggled to control. Despite his internal battles, Elvis remained fiercely dedicated to his career. His legendary work ethic, the same drive that had propelled him to stardom, continued to push him forward, even as his body began to fail him. He was determined to maintain the image of the king of rock and roll, the larger-than-life figure that millions adored. But behind the glitz and glamour of his public persona, Elvis was a man who felt the weight of his own legend pressing down on him. The demands to always be at his best, coupled with the fear of losing his edge, only added to his emotional turmoil. He wanted to give everything to his fans, but each performance, each public appearance, became more and more exhausting as his health deteriorated. The more he tried to maintain his image, the more it seemed to slip away, feeding his growing frustration. The night he threw the ice cream was just one manifestation of the deep personal struggle that plagued Elvis in his later years. The mood swings, the health problems, the reliance on medication. These were all signs of a man caught in a downward spiral. His outbursts were not just random flashes of anger, but rather cries for help, as he grappled with the reality that the life he had built was slowly unraveling. For those closest to him, like Ginger, these moments were heartbreaking to witness. They knew the Elvis that the world saw, charming, talented, and unstoppable, was fading, and in his place was a man who was growing more fragile and conflicted by the day. The incident at Graceland was just one of many signs that Elvis was losing the battle against his personal demons, a battle that would eventually have tragic consequences. Number 1. Emotional wrap-up and reflection. As we reflect on this moment in Elvis Presley's life, it's important to remember that even the most iconic figures are not immune to the pressures and challenges that come with fame. Elvis, the king of rock and roll, lived in a world of constant adoration, but behind the applause and the bright lights was a man struggling with insecurities, health problems, and the relentless demands of his public image. The fame that brought him to legendary status also became a burden he could never fully escape. It's easy to idolize someone like Elvis, but we often forget that these larger-than-life figures face personal struggles that are often hidden from the public eye. The man who could captivate millions was, in many ways, battling his own private demons. This story of Elvis losing his temper isn't just about a single outburst. It's a glimpse into the emotional weight he carried during his final years. It raises a deeper question. Did the pressures of fame drive Elvis to this point? The image of perfection he was expected to uphold undoubtedly took a toll, pushing him to his limits both mentally and physically. Do you think the demands of being Elvis Presley, the global superstar, ultimately contributed to his downward spiral? Or was it something more personal, something deeper? We want to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments below. Your perspective on how fame impacts even the most seemingly invincible stars could open up an important conversation. And if you thought this story was shocking, just wait until you hear what unfolded during Elvis's final days. The struggles, the secrets, and the heartbreaking end to his legendary life will leave you stunned. Stay tuned for our next video where we uncover the hidden details that led up to the king's last days. There's so much more to this story, and trust us, you won't believe what's coming next. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. As we dive deeper into the complexities of Elvis Presley's life, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think the immense pressures of fame played a major role in his emotional struggles? Or was it something more personal? How do you think Elvis's life might have been different without the weight of his public persona? Share your opinions and reflections in the comments below. Your insights can help us all better understand the man behind the legend. Picture this. You're excited to finally meet the king of rock and roll, only to be greeted not with a handshake, but with a cold steel revolver pressed to your chin. Yes, that's exactly what happened one fateful night when Elvis Presley, charming, iconic, unpredictable, suddenly pulled a gun on a famous fellow star. What could possibly have sparked such a shocking, intense moment? Tonight, we'll take you deep into the untold story that reveals a darker, more dangerous side of Elvis that even his closest fans never saw. So stay tuned, this wild tale is just getting started. Number 6. Introduction to Elvis's temperament. Elvis Presley wasn't just a musician, he was a force of nature, a cultural icon who swept the world off its feet. Known for his dazzling smile, irresistible charm, and a voice that sent chills down millions of spines, Elvis represented not only rock and roll, but the embodiment of charisma itself. In the public eye, he was gracious, always the gentleman, with a humility that seemed genuine despite his overwhelming fame. To fans, Elvis was larger than life, yet approachable, a Southern boy with a big heart and boundless talent. But behind the scenes, as he entered the 1970s, things were starting to change, and not always for the better. The pressures of fame were taking a toll on Elvis. After years of non-stop tours, grueling schedules, and the demands of being a global superstar, cracks began to show in the king's armor. Elvis's life was spiraling into a pattern of endless expectations, and he found himself constantly surrounded by people who wanted something from him. The stress grew unbearable, leading to frustration, and for the first time, people close to him noticed an edge to his personality that hadn't been there before. He began to feel threatened, isolated, and defensive, lashing out in ways that shocked even his inner circle. The Elvis that once brushed off inconveniences with a laugh now seemed quick to anger and even quicker to react. This new side of Elvis was alarming, especially his increasing tendency to reach for a gun when he felt provoked. Where he had once been polite and easygoing, Elvis now seemed ready to settle arguments with intimidation and threats. His ego was expanding, fed by years of adoration, and with it grew a darker impulse to maintain control by any means necessary. It became a habit. If someone dared to cross him, he was prepared to make his point with the cold barrel of a revolver. And on one unforgettable night, this dangerous shift in behavior came to a head with a fellow star, leading to a moment so shocking it would leave everyone stunned. But what could have possibly sparked such a heated, terrifying reaction? Number 5. Background on the incident. Elvis's closest confidants, including bodyguards Red and Sonny West, had witnessed firsthand the unsettling changes in his personality. In his early days, Elvis had been gracious to other performers, quick with a friendly word or a bit of encouragement. But by the 1970s, they saw a darker, more unpredictable Elvis emerge. No longer tolerant of others sharing his spotlight, he began to treat his peers with indifference, or worse, open hostility. The warmth he once exuded toward fellow entertainers had turned cold, replaced by biting remarks and a dismissive attitude. Red and Sunny, who had once known Elvis as the charismatic king, now found themselves dealing with a man who was increasingly impulsive, moody, and prone to anger. The night of this now infamous encounter was supposed to be an ordinary post-show visit, with Elvis meeting up with another star who had come to see him perform. The atmosphere was thick with expectation as this visitor waited outside Elvis's dressing room, eager to greet him. However, as minutes turned to nearly an hour, anticipation gave way to irritation. It wasn't unusual for Elvis to keep people waiting. He liked to make an entrance, to be greeted with admiration. But this time was different. Behind closed doors, Elvis seemed to be in no rush, enjoying the knowledge that he was making this fellow star wait. The suspense built with every passing minute, the tension heightened by the heavy silence in the hallway outside. By the time Elvis finally emerged, the air was thick with tension. His visitor, annoyed but masking it with a joking remark about Elvis's tardiness, tried to lighten the mood. But this wasn't the same easygoing Elvis who might have chuckled it off. Instead, he responded with a flash of anger, his temper flaring as he reached for his gun. In that moment, what was supposed to be a friendly exchange turned chillingly serious. The guest's playful greeting was met with the cold, unforgiving barrel of a revolver pressed under his chin. It was a jaw-dropping turn of events that stunned everyone present. But how could things have escalated to this point? And what was going through Elvis's mind as he held that gun? The answers would reveal even more about the darkness consuming him. Number 4. The encounter. When Elvis finally appeared, his visitor, visibly frustrated but trying to keep the mood light, greeted him with a playful jab. "Well, look who decided to show up," he joked, flashing a grin that masked his annoyance. After waiting for nearly an hour, the visitor wanted to make his irritation known without seeming rude, hoping Elvis would laugh and maybe apologize for keeping him waiting. But instead of a chuckle or a shrug, he got a reaction he could never have anticipated. The mood in the room, which had already been tense, seemed to tighten as he realized Elvis wasn't laughing along. Elvis's response was swift and unexpected. Without a word, he reached for his .22 revolver, drew it with practiced ease, and pressed the cold barrel under his visitor's chin. His voice low and chilling, he said, "And I ought to blow your head off for talking to me like that." The visitor's eyes widened in disbelief, his once friendly smile frozen in shock. It was as if the king of rock and roll had transformed in an instant, showing a dark and dangerous side hidden behind his public image. Elvis wasn't playing around, and the room was filled with a silence so sharp it seemed to hum with fear. Everyone who witnessed the scene stood in stunned discomfort, unsure of what might happen next. The visitor, caught off guard and rattled, tried to laugh it off, a shaky chuckle escaping his lips, but it was clear he was shaken to his core. Those around them exchanged uneasy glances, horrified by what they had just seen. The shock rippled through the room, leaving everyone uncertain and uncomfortable, each person holding their breath, wondering if Elvis would actually pull the trigger. What had led Elvis to this extreme? And what was happening behind his steely gaze at that moment? The answer would unravel a side of Elvis that few knew and even fewer dared to confront. Number 3. Elvis's changing personality. Elvis's bodyguards, Red and Sunny West, had seen the best and worst sides of the king. They had known him when he was a young, humble man, gracious and eager to make others feel valued. But over time, they began to notice a transformation, a shift in Elvis's temperament that went beyond the typical pressures of fame. His ego, once tempered by humility, seemed to inflate with each passing year. He demanded absolute loyalty and admiration from those around him, and any perceived slight was met with simmering resentment. The man who had once shrugged off criticism or teasing now reacted with fury, his patience growing thinner, his threshold for offense lower. For Red and Sunny, This change was painful to witness. It was as if the Elvis they once knew was slipping away, replaced by someone they barely recognized. This shift in Elvis's personality played out in numerous unpredictable and sometimes frightening ways. On one occasion, he fired a gun in the direction of his fiancée, Ginger Alden, just to get her attention. He also embarrassed a backup singer so intensely during a performance that when she tried to leave the stage, he confronted her with a weapon, as if her departure were a personal betrayal. These moments, shocking to those on the outside, became disturbingly routine within Elvis's inner circle. He seemed to use intimidation and threats as a twisted form of control, a way to remind everyone around him of his power. People who had once laughed and joked with him now walked on eggshells, afraid that a simple comment might set him off. As the years wore on, Elvis's obsession with guns grew increasingly bizarre. It was no longer enough for him to carry a weapon for self-protection. His guns became symbols of his authority and his frustrations. Perhaps one of the most infamous examples was his habit of shooting his television screen whenever Robert Goulet appeared, a strange ritual that baffled those around him. He would calmly draw his gun, aim, and fire at the image until it was obliterated, as though erasing Goulet from existence would ease whatever turmoil brewed inside him. But what drove this dark obsession, this fixation with asserting power through fear? Elvis's attachment to his guns hinted at a deeper unraveling, a struggle that would only intensify in the final years of his life, and one that would ultimately lead to even more startling events. Number 2. Climax. Identity reveal. The visitor who found himself staring down the barrel of Elvis Presley's revolver was, astonishingly, none other than Jimmy Dean, the famous singer and actor known for his hit song Big Bad John. Dean, a star in his own right, was no stranger to fame or the strong personalities that came with it. But even he could not have anticipated such a jarring welcome from Elvis, someone he had admired and respected. It was supposed to be a casual, friendly meeting between two celebrated artists, a chance to connect backstage. Instead, it turned into a surreal moment of fear and disbelief, leaving Dean stunned and uncertain of what might happen next. This encounter would forever leave a shadow over their relationship, one that Dean would never forget. Yes, the Big Bad John singer himself found out that night just how big Elvis's temper could be, landing on the wrong end of his revolver in a moment that would be seared into his memory. For the audience, this revelation is a jaw-dropping twist, showing that even an established star like Jimmy Dean wasn't immune to Elvis's volatile side. One can only imagine the tension, the unspoken questions swirling in the minds of those present. What could possibly make Elvis react so aggressively? And more importantly, what would Jimmy Dean do next in the face of such an intense threat? The answer would reveal even more about Elvis's spiraling behavior and the darker impulses that had begun to take control of his life. Number 1. Reflecting on Elvis's legacy incidents like the confrontation with Jimmy Dean shed a troubling light on Elvis's darker side, a side that complicates the beloved image that so many fans still hold dear. Elvis wasn't just a rock star, he was an American icon, adored for his charm, his groundbreaking talent, and the electrifying energy he brought to every performance. But fame, as it so often does, brought a heavy burden. Over time, the pressures of constantly being in the spotlight and the isolation that came with it began to alter Elvis's behavior. The man who had once been a symbol of youthful rebellion and innocence became haunted by anger, jealousy, and an unquenchable need for control. For his fans, these revelations create a stark contrast, showing just how deeply fame can twist even the most vibrant personalities. Those who knew Elvis best, including his bodyguards Red and Sonny West, felt the heartbreak of watching him change. They had known him as a gracious, fun-loving friend, but as the years went by, they saw a gradual shift. Elvis seemed to grow colder, quicker to anger, and more consumed by his need to command respect and loyalty from everyone around him. The bodyguards watched with helpless sadness as their friend became distant, moody, and prone to impulsive decisions, often with a gun in hand. They could only observe as his darker side took over, erasing the warmth they once cherished and replacing it with something far more volatile. For them, the transformation wasn't just painful, it was tragic, a loss of the man they had once known and loved. Elvis's story, at its heart, is one of deep complexity. He was a man capable of immense kindness who brought joy to millions, yet he was also plagued by insecurities and inner demons that fame only seemed to magnify. This duality, his undeniable charm and the darkness that lurked beneath it, paints a portrait of a man whose legacy is as haunting as it is inspiring. And for those who stood by his side, Elvis's Unraveling was a bitter reminder of the toll that fame can take on even the brightest of stars. But what fueled these drastic changes in Elvis's personality? And was there a turning point where he might have been able to reclaim his former self? The answers reveal even more about the pressures that drove him and the struggles he faced until his final days. What do you think drove Elvis to this darker, more unpredictable side? Was it the overwhelming pressure of fame or something deeper within him? We'd love to hear your thoughts and theories about this complex chapter in Elvis's life. Share your opinions in the comments below, and let's dive into the untold sides of the king together. The night was like any other in the whirlwind world of Elvis Presley's complicated relationships, yet it held a deeper tension that would make it unforgettable. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was always at the center of attention, surrounded by admirers, and often embroiled in a tangled web of romance. On this particular night, Elvis had a specific intention: to ensure Linda Thompson knew that she wasn't the only woman in his life. Linda, who had stood by Elvis during some of his most challenging times, was well aware of his wandering eye, but that didn't make the reality any less painful. The evening would become a stark reminder of the emotional boundaries Elvis pushed and how far he would go to assert his independence in their relationship. Linda's reaction, caught between love and heartbreak, would define not only the night, but also the dynamic of their relationship going forward. Stay with us as we reveal the true story behind the night Elvis Presley wanted Linda Thompson to know she wasn't the only woman in his life. Number 6. Elvis and Linda's relationship. After his divorce from Priscilla Presley in 1973, Elvis entered a new phase in his romantic life, one that was more public and less constrained by the norms of a traditional relationship. His marriage to Priscilla had been fraught with secrecy and tension, particularly regarding his infidelity. Priscilla was well aware of his unfaithfulness, yet Elvis went to great lengths to hide his affairs, attempting to maintain an illusion of commitment. When their marriage ultimately fell apart, it marked the beginning of a period where Elvis seemed less inclined to keep his romantic dalliances under wraps. He became more open about his relationships, and his need for companionship became more pronounced than ever before. It was during this time that Linda Thompson entered Elvis's life. Linda, a former beauty queen and actress, quickly became a significant figure in Elvis's post-divorce world. She provided him with a sense of stability and comfort amidst the chaos of fame. Linda was deeply devoted to Elvis, standing by his side through the highs and lows of his career and personal struggles. Unlike many of the women Elvis had been involved with, Linda genuinely wanted a future with him, one that involved marriage and a deeper commitment. She saw the potential for a life together beyond the limelight and hoped that their relationship could evolve into something more meaningful. However, Elvis, scarred by the failure of his first marriage, was reluctant to make that leap. His unwillingness to fully commit created a lingering tension between them, one that would eventually become impossible to ignore. Unlike with Priscilla, Elvis did not hide his relationships with other women from Linda. He was open about seeing others, even going as far as to flaunt these affairs in front of her. This was a stark contrast to the secrecy he had maintained during his marriage, and it reflected a shift in his approach to relationships. Elvis seemed determined to assert his independence, perhaps as a reaction to the constraints he had felt in his marriage to Priscilla. He wanted Linda to understand that while she was important to him, she was not the only woman in his life. This openness was incredibly painful for Linda, who had hoped for exclusivity and commitment. Despite the hurt, she chose to stay, hoping that her love and loyalty would eventually lead Elvis to change his ways and see her as his true partner. This dynamic of openness, paired with Linda's hope for something more, set the stage for many of the challenges they faced as a couple. Number 5. Elvis's intentions, making Linda aware. Elvis took a bold approach to relationships during his time with Linda Thompson, openly dating other women without any attempt to conceal his actions. Unlike the secrecy he had practiced during his marriage to Priscilla, Elvis now seemed determined to flaunt his relationships, as if to assert his independence. This unapologetic behavior was not just about fulfilling his own desires. It was also a calculated message to Linda. He wanted her to know that, while she played a significant role in his life, he was not bound by the expectations of exclusivity. Elvis enjoyed the freedom to see other women and made no effort to shield Linda from the reality of his actions. This behavior put Linda in a painful position as she tried to reconcile her love for Elvis with the hurt of his infidelity, all while hoping that he would eventually see her as his one true partner. One of the most vivid examples of this dynamic came from Elvis's bodyguard Sonny West, as detailed in the book Elvis, What Happened? According to Sonny, Elvis would often alternate between taking Linda and another woman, Sheila Ryan, on tour with him. This deliberate rotation highlighted Elvis's desire to maintain control over his relationships, keeping both women close, yet never fully committing to either. Sonny recalled hearing Elvis dismiss Linda's feelings whenever she expressed her discomfort, famously telling her, "Woman, take that knife out of my damn back." These words not only reflected Elvis's frustration with Linda's demands for commitment, but also his unwillingness to acknowledge her pain. He was determined to live life on his terms, even if it meant hurting those closest to him. This approach left Linda in a state of emotional limbo, always feeling as though she had to compete for Elvis's affection and attention. Elvis's flippant remark, "Linda thinks she is married to me," further demonstrated his reluctance to take their relationship seriously. He was aware of Linda's desire for a deeper connection, yet he intentionally downplayed the significance of their bond. By making such comments, Elvis sought to maintain a sense of distance, reminding Linda, and perhaps even himself, that their relationship was not as permanent or binding as she wished it to be. This statement was not just a way to dismiss Linda's hopes, it was also a reflection of Elvis's own fears and insecurities. Having experienced the failure of his marriage to Priscilla, Elvis seemed hesitant to put himself in a similar position again. Instead, he chose to keep Linda at arm's length, ensuring that she understood her place in his life while never allowing her to feel entirely secure. This emotional push and pull defined their relationship, creating an environment where Linda was constantly torn between her deep love for Elvis and the harsh reality of his unwillingness to fully commit. Number 4. The night in question. A photographer's opportunity. One particular night during Elvis's relationship with Linda stood out as an unforgettable example of his efforts to make his intentions crystal clear. Elvis was out with another one of his girlfriends, enjoying a public evening that was destined to be anything but private. As the couple moved through the night, a photographer spotted them and saw an opportunity to capture a candid moment of the king of rock and roll with his new companion. Elvis's driver, perhaps assuming that the singer would want to avoid any negative repercussions or further hurt Linda, instinctively began to pull away to avoid the flash of the camera. But Elvis had other ideas, and his response was both surprising and telling. Rather than avoiding the spotlight, Elvis encouraged the driver to stop. "Let him take the picture," he said with a casual air. "I don't mind if they use it." Elvis was fully aware that any image of him with another woman would quickly make its way into public view, and ultimately, back to Linda. By allowing the photographer to take the picture, Elvis was making a deliberate statement. He was no longer interested in hiding his affairs or sparing Linda's feelings. Instead, he was asserting his freedom to live as he pleased, regardless of the emotional cost to those who loved him. His indifference to how Linda might react to seeing him with someone else spoke volumes about the shifting power dynamics in their relationship. Elvis was in control, and he wanted everyone, including Linda, to understand that. The intent behind this photograph went beyond just a moment of defiance. It was a calculated move designed to send a clear message to Linda. Elvis wanted her to know that she wasn't the only one in his life, and he was prepared to make that fact as public as possible. It was a stark reminder to Linda of where she stood, important, but not irreplaceable. The image captured that night became symbolic of the ongoing struggle within their relationship. Elvis's desire for independence clashed directly with Linda's hope for commitment. For Linda, seeing Elvis with another woman was a painful blow, one that highlighted the fragile nature of their love. Yet despite the hurt, Linda remained by his side, holding on to the hope that Elvis might one day choose her above all others. This incident, like many others, underscored the emotional turmoil that defined their time together, a constant push and pull between love, loyalty, and the harsh realities of fame and infidelity. Number 3. Linda Thompson's perspective. During an emotional interview on Larry King Live, Linda Thompson reflected on her complex relationship with Elvis Presley, offering a rare glimpse into the challenges she faced as she stood by his side. She spoke candidly about the emotional roller coaster of being with someone as iconic and complicated as Elvis. Linda admitted that she often struggled to make sense of Elvis's behavior, particularly his infidelity and his need to be surrounded by other women. Despite the heartbreak, she emphasized her deep love for Elvis and her desire to understand him. Linda's reflections were tinged with both nostalgia and pain, as she recounted the difficult moments she endured while trying to reconcile the man she loved with the persona that captivated the world. Linda's attempt to reconcile Elvis's need for companionship with the toll it took on her was an ongoing battle. She understood that Elvis was not just any man. He was a global icon, constantly in the spotlight and often isolated by his fame. Linda recognized that Elvis needed people around him to fill the void left by the pressures of his career and his personal demons. She tried to be understanding, telling herself that his relationships with other women were not always about physical intimacy, but rather a way for Elvis to find solace and escape from the overwhelming demands of his life. Despite her efforts to rationalize his behavior, the emotional toll on Linda was immense. She found herself in a constant state of uncertainty, never knowing if her love and devotion would be enough to keep Elvis by her side. Linda also spoke about her understanding of Elvis's deep sense of isolation from the world. She knew that despite his fame and the adoration of millions, Elvis often felt alone. The people who surrounded him were not always there out of genuine care. Many were drawn to his status and what he could offer them. Linda believed that Elvis's desire to be with different people was, in part, a way to combat this loneliness. He sought out individuals who could bring new perspectives and a sense of normalcy to his otherwise extraordinary life. Linda tried to be compassionate, recognizing that Elvis's need for constant companionship was a reflection of his vulnerability. However, this understanding did not make the pain any easier to bear. The emotional strain of sharing Elvis with others left Linda feeling isolated in her own right, as she navigated the complexities of loving a man who belonged not just to her, but to the world. Number 2. The impact of Elvis's behavior on Linda. Linda Thompson's struggle with Elvis's infidelity was a constant source of pain and tension throughout their relationship. The repeated betrayals took an immense toll on Linda, who found herself caught in a cycle of heartbreak and reconciliation. Each time Elvis strayed, it reopened wounds that had barely begun to heal, leading to arguments that often left both of them emotionally drained. Despite her best efforts to stay strong, Linda found it increasingly difficult to cope with the reality of Elvis's actions. She loved him deeply, but the constant presence of other women in his life made her question her own worth and whether Elvis truly valued her. The emotional strain of these arguments began to weigh heavily on Linda, who was torn between her devotion to Elvis and the knowledge that his behavior was slowly breaking her spirit. In her memoir, A Little Thing Called Life, Linda opened up about the profound impact the relationship had on her mental health. She described how the stress of Elvis's infidelity, combined with the pressures of his fame and the demands of being his partner, led to moments of deep despair. Linda often felt isolated, as if she were living in a world where her needs and feelings were secondary to Elvis's desires. The constant uncertainty took a toll on her sense of self, leaving her feeling emotionally depleted and struggling to maintain her own identity. She wrote about the anxiety that plagued her, the sleepless nights spent worrying about Elvis's well-being, and the fear that her love might never be enough to save him. Despite the glamorous facade of being with the king of rock and roll, Linda's reality was one of emotional exhaustion and a growing sense of hopelessness. As time went on, Linda's concern for Elvis's health began to overshadow even the pain of his infidelity. She watched helplessly as his lifestyle took a severe toll on his physical and mental well-being. The man she had once known as vibrant and full of life was now struggling with the consequences of his fame, his dependence on prescription drugs, and the pressures that came with his status. Linda's love for Elvis was unwavering, but she could no longer ignore the fact that their relationship was on a dangerous path. She began to doubt whether they had a future together, as Elvis seemed unwilling or unable to make the changes necessary for his health and for their relationship to thrive. The weight of these doubts, coupled with her growing fear for his life, left Linda at a crossroads, torn between her love for Elvis and the realization that staying with him might mean losing herself entirely. Number 1. Emotional fallout. Stress and self-doubt. Linda's struggle with stress over Elvis's deteriorating health became one of the defining challenges of their relationship. As Elvis's health continued to decline, Linda found herself increasingly burdened by worry and fear. She watched helplessly as the man she loved, once full of life and charisma, began to succumb to the pressures and excesses that came with fame. The toll of his lifestyle choices, his reliance on prescription medications and erratic sleep patterns, was becoming impossible to ignore. Linda felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She wanted to be there for Elvis, to protect him, but the reality of his self-destructive behavior made her efforts seem futile. The stress of witnessing his decline left her emotionally exhausted, and she began to realize that her love alone might not be enough to save him. Over time, Linda also came to the painful realization that she and Elvis had entirely different views on what their future together should look like. While Linda yearned for stability and a deeper commitment, Elvis seemed content to live in the moment, unwilling or unable to plan for a future beyond the next performance or public appearance. This fundamental difference in their perspectives became a growing source of tension between them. Linda wanted a life that included the possibility of marriage and building a stable home, but Elvis was trapped in a cycle of performances, parties, and fleeting distractions. The more she tried to steer their relationship toward a shared vision of the future, the more she realized Elvis was not ready, or perhaps even capable, of making that kind of commitment. It was a heartbreaking realization for Linda, who had given so much of herself in the hope that their love could overcome these obstacles. In her memoir, A Little Thing Called Life, Linda poignantly described the emotional toll of this disconnect. She wrote, "I did begin to fear for my sanity as I understood more and more how I was living a version of the emperor has no clothes." This powerful statement encapsulated the growing sense of disillusionment that Linda felt. She had devoted herself to Elvis, believing in the love they shared and the future they could build together. Yet, as his health deteriorated and his behavior became more erratic, she began to see the cracks in the illusion she had created for herself. The man she loved was slipping away, and the life she had imagined was nothing more than a fragile facade. Linda's fear for her sanity was a reflection of the immense pressure she was under, caught between her love for Elvis and the harsh reality that their relationship might never become what she had hoped. The emotional strain of these realizations left Linda questioning not only her future with Elvis, but also her own sense of self-worth and strength. The relationship between Elvis and Linda was a complex blend of love, infidelity, and unwavering loyalty. It was a roller coaster of emotions, shaped by Elvis's fame, the power dynamics that came with being a global icon, and his insatiable emotional needs. Linda's devotion to Elvis was evident through her willingness to endure the pain of his infidelity, all in the hope that he might eventually give her the commitment she longed for. Yet, the harsh realities of fame and Elvis's desire to maintain his independence created an unbalanced and often heartbreaking dynamic. As we reflect on their story, it's impossible not to wonder, what would you have done in Linda's situation? Would you have stayed, hoping for change, or walked away to protect your own well-being? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the life of Elvis Presley, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more content, and check out our other videos exploring the fascinating and tumultuous relationships that shaped the King of Rock and Roll. The night Priscilla collapsed, everything changed. Elvis Presley, the man adored by millions, made a decision that stunned everyone who knew him. As Priscilla lay unconscious, he chose to ignore her, leaving her unacknowledged for 2 whole days. What could drive such a seemingly cold and indifferent reaction from the King of Rock and Roll? Their relationship had always been a whirlwind, full of passion, tension, and unexpected turns. Behind the glitz and glamour, the cracks in their marriage had been widening, with unspoken conflicts and simmering resentments bubbling beneath the surface. Was this a calculated move on Elvis's part, or did it reveal a deeper, more troubled side of their relationship? This incident could very well mark the turning point in their love story, leading to a downfall no one saw coming. What really happened during those 2 days, and why did Elvis react the way he did? Stay tuned as we unravel the shocking details of that night, exposing the hidden complexities of their love and the unraveling of a marriage once thought to be untouchable. Number 4. Elvis and Priscilla's relationship. Elvis Presley and Priscilla Beaulieu's love story began like something out of a Hollywood romance, only it wasn't entirely what it seemed. The two met in 1959 while Elvis was stationed in Germany during his military service, and Priscilla was just 14 years old. Their attraction was immediate, despite the 10-year age gap, which sparked plenty of controversy at the time. While Elvis's life was already filled with fame, fortune, and adoration from countless fans, Priscilla was drawn into his orbit, captivated by the larger-than-life figure. The relationship progressed quickly, but despite their closeness, there was a long wait before they could marry. Priscilla eventually moved to Graceland in 1963, under the condition that they would remain chaste until marriage, as agreed upon with her parents. It wasn't until 1967, after years of waiting, that Elvis finally made her his bride. But even then, the foundations of their relationship were already fragile. Beneath the glamorous exterior of the Presley marriage, cracks had been forming long before that fateful night. Elvis's rising fame took him on tour across the country, where he was often surrounded by adoring women eager to be in his presence. His infidelities became an open secret, and while Priscilla waited for him at home, the emotional distance between them grew. The Elvis who once wooed her with promises of love and devotion was now a man who sought comfort in the arms of others while on the road. This left Priscilla feeling increasingly isolated and frustrated, stuck in a marriage where she no longer felt valued. Her once innocent love had transformed into a complex, emotionally fraught situation as she began to question her place in Elvis's world. By the time of Priscilla's collapse, the tensions between the two had reached a breaking point. Elvis's constant absences, his affairs, and his inability to emotionally connect with Priscilla created an atmosphere of mistrust and resentment. Priscilla, on the other hand, was tired of waiting around for a husband who was barely present. She began exploring her own desires and ambitions, further straining their already delicate relationship. This volatile mixture of emotions, unspoken frustrations, and festering wounds had set the stage for what would become one of the most shocking moments in their marriage. The night she collapsed wasn't just a physical event. It was the culmination of years of silent struggles and unresolved conflicts. Number 3. The night Priscilla passed out. The night Priscilla passed out was nothing short of dramatic, an unforgettable moment in their already tumultuous relationship. It happened at Graceland, the home that was meant to be their sanctuary, yet often felt more like a gilded cage for Priscilla. After days, maybe weeks, of emotional stress and mounting pressure, Priscilla collapsed, her body finally giving in to the weight of the turmoil within her. Was it exhaustion, a cry for help, or a reaction to something much deeper? As she lay unconscious, those around her rushed to her aid, but Elvis stood frozen, watching as the woman he once claimed to love drifted into an unconscious state. In a shocking turn of events, Elvis did nothing. He ignored her entirely, choosing not to speak or even acknowledge what had just happened. For 2 days, he maintained this cold silence, leaving those around them bewildered, and Priscilla, when she recovered, confused and heartbroken. The silence that followed was deafening, not just in their home but in their relationship. Why would Elvis, a man known for his charisma and charm, respond in such a detached, almost cruel manner? Some might argue that it was a power move, his way of asserting control over a situation that had been slipping through his fingers for years. By not addressing Priscilla's collapse, was Elvis trying to remind her that he still held the reins? Others speculate that it wasn't about power at all, but rather emotional distance. Perhaps the years of infidelity, the constant tension between his public persona and private struggles, had left him too numb to respond. In that moment, it was easier to pretend nothing had happened than to face the reality of their crumbling marriage. But ignoring it only added fuel to the fire, pushing Priscilla further away. As the hours turned into days, the tension inside Graceland grew unbearable. With each passing minute, the silence between them became louder, more suffocating. What was once a relationship built on passion and excitement had turned into a battlefield of unspoken resentments and cold indifference. Priscilla, no doubt, felt abandoned, left to recover from her collapse not just physically but emotionally, without a word of comfort from the man she had stood by for years. For Elvis, the silence may have been a temporary escape from confronting his own failures in their marriage, but it only served to deepen the emotional chasm between them. The 2 days of silence were more than just a pause. They were a signal that their relationship, once filled with promise, was teetering on the edge of collapse. Number 2. Unpacking Elvis's reaction. Elvis's behavior during those 2 days of silence can be viewed through a psychological lens, revealing layers of complexity beneath the surface. Elvis was not just a global superstar, he was a man deeply troubled by his own insecurities. His need to control Priscilla, to keep her as his girl, while he indulged in countless affairs, was a reflection of his fear of losing the one stable relationship in his life. From the very beginning, Elvis had an almost possessive grip on Priscilla. He dictated how she dressed, who she associated with, and even when they could be intimate. His desire to mold her into the perfect wife while he lived his life as he pleased was a sign of both his controlling nature and his insecurities. The fact that he could ignore her collapse for 2 days could be interpreted as his way of reasserting that control, punishing her with silence, perhaps, for daring to show vulnerability in front of him. Looking back on their relationship, there were numerous instances that hinted at Elvis's need to maintain power over Priscilla. He didn't want her to pursue her own interests or have relationships with other men. Even before they were married, he made it clear that Priscilla was to be his and only his, setting boundaries that stifled her personal growth. The psychological strain of being Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, under constant public scrutiny, likely amplified his need to have control over the one thing he thought he could manage: his relationship. In moments of vulnerability, instead of offering comfort, Elvis retreated into this controlling pattern, making it easier for him to distance himself emotionally from the situation. This incident, where he refused to speak to Priscilla after she passed out, aligns with that pattern of behavior. It was his way of maintaining the upper hand, of showing her and perhaps himself that he wasn't emotionally affected, even when the truth was likely far more complicated. Rumors and anecdotes from close friends and family suggest that during this time, Elvis was under immense personal pressure. His career had taken him to unimaginable heights, but it came at a cost, both physically and mentally. Some have suggested that his silence could have been a defense mechanism, a way to avoid confronting the unraveling of his relationship. According to those who were close to the couple, Elvis struggled to deal with emotional confrontation. This event, his reaction to Priscilla's collapse, spoke volumes about the fragile state of their marriage. The dynamic between them had shifted from love and excitement to a cold war of emotional distance, with Elvis unwilling or unable to engage on a deeper level. His actions were not just about control, they were also about avoiding the vulnerability that came with confronting the painful truth of their relationship's decline. This moment marked a turning point, exposing the fragility beneath the surface of what appeared to be a picture-perfect marriage. Number 1. Aftermath. What happened next? When Elvis finally broke his 2-day silence, the atmosphere at Graceland was thick with tension. Priscilla had spent those agonizing days wondering what was going through his mind, perhaps hoping that he would show some sign of care or remorse. But when Elvis spoke, it wasn't with the compassion she had hoped for. His words were cold and distant, as if the emotional gulf between them had only widened during the silence. Instead of a confrontation where they might have aired their grievances, Elvis chose to gloss over the entire event, barely acknowledging what had happened. It was as if he expected Priscilla to move on without question, to fall back into line, as if nothing had ever happened. In his mind, the silence was punishment enough. He had reasserted his control, and now it was time to return to the status quo. But for Priscilla, the damage was done, and the emotional wounds ran deep. This incident left a permanent scar on their marriage, one that neither could fully recover from. For Priscilla, being ignored during one of her most vulnerable moments shattered any illusions she may have still harbored about Elvis's love and care for her. She had always stood by him, enduring the infidelities and the emotional distance. But this was different. This was a clear message that, in her moment of need, she was truly alone. For Elvis, though he may not have realized it at the time, his indifference created a rift that could never be mended. The trust, already fragile, was broken, and the emotional connection that had once bound them was now fraying at the seams. While they may have continued to live together and play the roles of husband and wife for a while longer, the relationship had irreversibly changed. This moment of silence and indifference could very well have been one of the final straws that led to their eventual split. Though their marriage had already been riddled with infidelity, secrecy, and growing emotional distance, this incident highlighted just how disconnected they had become. It wasn't just about Elvis's reaction in that moment. It was about what it symbolized. It showed that he was no longer emotionally invested in their marriage in the way Priscilla needed him to be. From this point forward, their relationship was on borrowed time. The collapse that Priscilla experienced wasn't just physical, it was a reflection of their crumbling marriage, one that would never fully recover from the strain. Eventually, this emotional disintegration would lead to Priscilla making the decision to leave Elvis, marking the end of a relationship that had once captivated the world. The 2-day silence between Elvis and Priscilla following her collapse was more than just a moment of emotional distance. It was a stark reflection of the deep fractures in their complicated love. What began as a passionate whirlwind romance had unraveled into a relationship marked by control, resentment, and unresolved tensions. Elvis's refusal to speak, to show any concern for Priscilla's well-being, spoke volumes about the emotional chasm that had formed between them. His reaction, or lack thereof, was not just shocking, but revealing. It exposed the fragility of their marriage, highlighting the toll fame, infidelity, and personal insecurities had taken on them both. But was Elvis truly a victim of his own fame, overwhelmed by the pressures of stardom, or were his actions signs of deeper, unresolved personal struggles? We want to hear from you. Do you think Elvis's reaction was justified, or was it too cold for someone he once claimed to love? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's discuss the real impact of this moment in Elvis and Priscilla's story. What if I told you that Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, once gathered up his favorite books he cherished, underlined, and read countless times, only to coat them in oil and set them on fire? And no, this wasn't some casual